So good morning, everybody. A warm welcome to all of you to the AIOC 2021. This is the first virtual conference ever I'm attending for the national conference. So today our instruction course is about
capital A,
SG subcapital.
subcapital, ठीक है?
others
ASG.
mute the audio, please. Yeah. So today we will be talking about technology behests cataract surgery. Behests means it commands. Nowadays, as we all know, we are the most prominent surgeons in respective areas. We know that cataract surgery is no more taken for granted. We need to do things little bit more to give our patients a pleasurable experience. And that pleasurable experience not only boosts you, but your practice as well. So today we have a lot of galaxy of speakers who will be figuring out the things, how to make it more lucid, how to make it more helpful for our patient, for our provider, for the caretakers who have come with a hope that you will give a good vision to them. So hence, cataract surgery is no more about general surgery. It requires a lot of customization. Customization is very, very important. Like individually, you have to see what are the patient wants and what are the things you need to do for individual patient. And meticulousness. Every procedure requires a lot of meticulousness so that whatever the outcome you are desiring, it will be coming. And that eventually will develop a trust between us and the patient. So this is the course. So I'll be starting with my presentation. The first topic is, so I'm able to see, but I'm not comfortable at all. Did we miss the bus of assessment of the ocular surface? So a successful cataract surgery does not guarantee you to have a good trust between your patient. Patient will be unhappy. See, in this case, I've done a multifocal IOL. Still, that patient has come to me and always she doesn't complain about vision. She always complains about itching, irritation, foreign body sensation, sensitivity to light, all these complaints. So we are missing something in here. We are missing something about the ocular surface. Hence, it is very imperative to identify what are the problems you have on the ocular surface and deal with them accurately. This is a very important study which was published last year. You can see here, 19% of the asymptomatic patients with frail ocular surfaces developed a significant risk and significant complication post-surgical dry eye disease symptoms. So there, as you all know, the dry eye disease symptoms include the itching, irritation, foreign body sensation, sensitivity to light, and sometimes ocular pain also can be considered as a symptom of dry eye disease. And it's very important to see 19% of the patients, like 1 out of 5 patients have some form of ocular surface problem. And because you have not dealt with those patients earlier, these patients eventually will develop a significant ocular surface problem and have a good vision, but not quality vision. If you look at this corneal topography, this is the anterior float. If you could see here, no 2 points are similar. So if you see, the corneal is not regular. The surface of the cornea is not smooth. And if the light rays falling on an irregular corneal surface, definitely there will be having a lot of irregular refraction. So you need a tear film which covers that irregularities, which compensates for that irregularities to give a smooth and a better quality of images for the patient. Hence, post-cataract surgery is very important to have a good ocular surface. Most of the time, we misdiagnose this problem. Hence, it is very essential for us to identify this problem at an early stage or at the preoperative stage, so that once we can treat in the preoperative level, after surgery, patient will have a smooth vision.
यहाँ पे लाइट नहीं आता है ना पीछे?
Can the other mute, please? Cataracts and dry eye disease are very commonly associated in the elderly. You can see in this study, phacoemulsification can independently induce or exacerbate dry eye disease symptoms, and it's very important. So doing a good phacosurgery with 2.2 to 1.8 or 2.8, whatever it is, when you are dealing with astigmatism, you have to deal with the ocular surface also. You may be thinking that you are giving less astigmatism, the good quality image to the patient, but at the end of the day, after 1 month, the patient will having a definite symptoms of discomfort and poor vision because of the surface disease. Why a patient develops a dry eye disease? It's very, very important because there are certain theories why the patient develops because of the excessive use of topical anesthetics before the surgery, and exposure desiccation that may cause a dry eye. There is a theory of possible light toxicity from the operating microscope, because as we are doing the surgery at the cornea level, because earlier the surgery used to be at the sclerocorneal level, we were not cutting the cornea, but now we are doing at the corneal level, we are transecting the nerve, we are cutting the nerves. And there are definitely post-surgical, any surgery, there is an increase in the inflammatory factors, goblet cell loss, and all these factors, which eventually causes poor ocular surface. Most importantly, the patients have a preoperative meibomian gland dysfunction, which was missed beforehand, and these patients has an aggravation of meibomian gland dysfunction causing ocular surface problem. So this is a very important epidemiological study which I came to know. Here you can see in this study, around 51.8% of the general population and 68.3% of the general population had some form of MGD. That means a lot of geriatric people, almost like more than half of the people, have some form of MGD. And if this MGD is not taken care of, because MGD is very important, meibomian glands are very important for the tear film. It contributes to the lipid layer of the tear film. And if there is any dysfunction of the meibomian gland, like obstructive MGD or some form of meibomian gland loss, the lipid layer comes down, and definitely the tear film, the aqueous part of the component, will evaporate early, causing dry eye symptom. Patient will have increased blinking. Patient will have a lot of discomfort. Meibomian gland identification, dysfunction identification is very, very important. Before cataract surgery, you need to just evert the lids and see the lid margin, whether you are having certain pouts or any paste-like secretions which are coming out of the meibomian gland. These cases needs to be handled before cataract surgery, so that the patient will not, there will be no aggravation of meibomian gland dysfunction. This we can identify the lipid layer with the non-invasive investigations also, where you can see this uses the technology called as auto interferometry, where you can identify the lipid layer, and it's a non-invasive test. And during these COVID times, you can identify this lipid layer with no problem, because when you're touching the patient, there is a risk of COVID transmission from the tear film. But when there are non-invasive tests, the chances of COVID transmission is less. Tear meniscus height under the slit lamp examination is again a very, very important identification or a very important sign to see whether the patient is having any dry eye disease. Ideally, it's very difficult to see the measurement, to do the measurements, but you can take certain photographs and you can measure. If it is less than 0.25 millimeter, then you are dealing with something in some dry eye disease. You can go for a video corneal topography and also see whether there is the tear meniscus height is proper or not. Patient having less than 0.25 millimeters of tear meniscus height needs to be carefully evaluated, needs to be investigated for other causes like connective tissue diseases or any arthritic diseases. And these patients needs to be treated at an early stage, so that the patient's aggravation of dry eye disease will be less. Breakup time is again a very, very important. You can see here the breakup time video. So tear film breakup time. Helps you to determine the quality of the tear film, ocular surface tear film protection, and lower the number, like if it is less than 8 seconds or less than 5 seconds, greater is the number of symptoms. This can be identified by test also, where you can use a corneal topography or Placido rings to identify the amount of tear film breakup time, which is called as NIBUT or non-invasive breakup time. Hence, we did a small study about 30 eyes of 30 patients. This was an in-house study, which is not yet published, which we thought of assessing the patient of dry eye symptoms post-surgery. Patients with a negative history of all endocrine diseases like thyroid diseases, arthritis, and chronic topical drug usage were excluded from the study. Included, it has been written. It is excluded from the study. All these patients were assessed for dry eye disease. And you can see there was a significant reduction of lipid profile from 48 to 40. The number was reduced at 1 month post-op. And there was also significant reduction in NIBUT from 9.6 to 7.5. And there was also reduction of tear meniscus height to 0.18. And this has been validated in the present in a new study which was published in last year from Lucknow, and they have shown that there is a significant reduction in Shermer test in TBUT, Lissamine green staining, as well as OSDI, that ocular surface staining score. Also, there was significant reduction from the preoperative compared to the postoperative 1 month. You can see here the TBUT has reduced from 13.5 to 9.64. Hence, it is very critical and essential to identify the risk factors like connective tissue disorders, thyroid dysfunction, psychiatric condition, computer usage, ocular allergy, history of refractive surgery, topical drugs, TBUT with fluorescein, meibomian gland expressibility, and conjunctival folds. All these are very, very important clinical signs to identify the patient, whether the patient is having any poor ocular surface. And you can, with these signs, you can calculate the ocular surface frailty index, and according to that index, you can see what should be done before cataract surgery. At least 1 month prior to the surgery, you can treat those conditions, treat the inflammation, give them good lubrications, treat them with cyclosporin, and after 1 month, you can perform the surgery so that the patient will have a good visual outcome. And in all the premium surgeries, I would suggest my viewers to have a dry eye assessment and specular microscopy in their part of the curriculum in the preoperative cataract assessment, because it's very important nowadays in the medical legal conditions, in the this thing, we need to have a proper dry eye assessment. This is my concluding slide. And triaging your cataract patients for dry and chronically inflamed surfaces are very, very critical. Cases with significant risk factors, poor lipid layers, NIBUT less than 8 seconds, and TMH of less than 0.020 needs to be treated at least 1 month prior to cataract surgery. So thank you very much for the kind attention. So we'll go to the next presenter. He's none other than my dear friend, Dr. Sean, who has done his MBBS and MS from Goa Medical College. He was a fellow in cornea and anterior segment from Arvind Eye Hospital, Madurai. Now, presently, he's working in ASG Eye Hospital, Goa. He will be speaking about, I was seeing better before surgery. Have you worsened it? Did we miss the cornea? So over to you, cornea. Oh, sorry, over to you, Sean. So please.
Good morning, everybody, and I'll just share my screen right now. Dr. Praveen, can we start with the next topic so I can just see what's wrong with the share screen?
So the next presenter is our own Dr. Ashok Kumar Nanda, who is a proficient practitioner from Bhubaneswar. He's a mentor to a lot of the budding ophthalmologists. I felt this topic will be better covered by none other than Dr. Ashok sir, who will be speaking about, I'm able to see, but my perception of images are not clear. Did we create new aberrations? He's a cataract and refractive surgery consultant at Core Vision Eye Hospital, Bhubaneswar. Over to you, Ashok sir.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen. Right. I think my slides are visible now.
Yeah.
So in good old days, patients had the choice to choose only their doctor. The surgery was same, but now they're spoiled with choices. Not only they have to choose the doctor, they have to choose the surgery, the lens, and therefore their expectation is also increasing, and they're no more happy with the 20/20 Snell's visual acuity. So we get a lot of patients who say, well, my vision is okay, but my images are not that clear. So if we analyze the cause, one of the main reasons why the vision is not clear is because of aberration. When I was reading about aberration, I remembered Sir Truman had said, if you cannot convince the Senate, confuse them. In science, obviously, you cannot remain confused. So let's go into aberration in little more detail. Human eye is the most complex and most imperfect optical system. This was a statement of Sir Duke Elda. Dr. Jarnicke said, optical aberration is the departure from an optical system for producing aberration, a image which is not sharp. So aberration can be analyzed most commonly by Zernike polynomial, and it is expressed in root mean square. It is measured either by point spread function or by modular transfer function. So there are 16 grades of aberration. 0 order to first order are called constant aberration. Second order are the lower order aberration. Third order and above are called the higher order aberration. 0 order aberration is called piston, and order 1 is tilt and tip. Second order are defocus and primary astigmatism, which can be corrected through spectacles. Third order is coma and trefoil. Fourth order are spherical and chromatic aberration and quadrifoil, secondary astigmatism. These are corrected by surgery. Fifth order aberrations are requiring neuroadaptation. So what is a piston? Piston tilt, as I said, when you look at the point spread function, the focus is like a point here. But the point spread function in all other aberrations are more, especially if you look at the central triangle, the point spread function is worse. So let's understand what is tilt. It is a physiological aberration where the nearby objects appear bigger and the further objects appear smaller. Defocus, we all know, is when you look at an object and it is not focused either by myopia or hypermetropia. These are defocus, and if it is not focused in one particular axis, it is called astigmatism. Coma and trefoil is when you look at light and you see the light spreading out, it is coma and trefoil. Spherical aberration, we know, is the central rays focusing at one plane and the peripheral focusing in another plane is called spherical aberration. Different wavelengths of light focusing at different planes are chromatic aberration. And all these higher order aberration cause photic phenomenon and difficulty in quality of vision. There are various causes in post-cataract scenario which can cause aberration. From corneal surface, dry eye has been covered by Praveen. From the wound, from pre-existing spherical aberration and aberrations induced by lens, chromatic aberration, aberrations caused by IOL tilt and decentration, and most importantly, use of premium IOLs when angle alpha is big. I'll not go into details of dry eye aberration. We all know dry eye causes aberration, especially the coma and trefoil, and lubricating drops do improve these aberrations. It has also been seen that dry eyes not only increase aberration, they also decrease the vision-related quality of life. Wound, we know in SICS, the corneal wound can cause astigmatism. In addition to that, it can also cause coma and trefoil, and it is mostly from the posterior surface of the cornea. Higher order aberrations are present in eye, and intraocular lenses, our choice, can worsen it. We know that natural cornea has about plus 0.25 spherical aberration, and lens can neutralize minus 0.2. Whereas when the cataract develops, it becomes more positive and worsens the higher order aberrations. So when we compare post cataract surgery patient with a cataract patient, obviously aberrations decrease. But with a normal patient, if you compare a pseudophakic eye, aberrations are still present and they can cause reduced contrast sensitivity. If you look at a simulated chart from the eye trace is a machine where you can segregate the aberrations from total aberration to internal and corneal aberration. So if you see here, this is the internal aberration, so this is the corneal aberration, this is internal aberration, and this is total aberration. So if you remove the lenticular aberration and put a lens which can neutralize the corneal aberration, then you get a lens, the image which is good in quality. The eye trace can also give aberration in forms of map, where you can see the external aberration or corneal aberration is quite smooth here, whereas the internal aberration is more. In this case, if you remove the lens and put a lens which does not have aberration, you can get good vision. It can also give in form of chart. This is internal aberration, this is corneal aberration. It is high here, the aberrations being high. In this case, if you put a higher lens of premium IOL, then the patient may not be happy. But here, if you see, the internal aberrations are high and the corneal aberrations are low. In this case, the patient will be happier. In addition to the higher order aberration, you must look into corneal spherical aberration, which is expressed in the plus number mostly. Try to neutralize it with appropriate IOLs. For a plus spherical aberration, use a negative spherical aberration IOL. And for others, accordingly, choose your IOL appropriately. If the residual spherical aberration, which is after neutralizing the corneal aberration, is 0, try to target plano refraction. If it is negative, then try to target a plus spherical aberration for a 0.1 micron. And if it is positive, then target minus 0.25 for a 0.1 micron. And this is important for LASIK eyes, post-LASIK eyes, because hyperepic LASIK causes minus spherical aberration and myopic LASIK causes spherical aberration. Let us look into tilt and decentration. We know that decentration more than 0.5 can lose the effect of sphericity, and tilt also causes significant amount of coma. And lastly, it is the angle alpha. Angle alpha is important, is basically the difference between the optical center and the patient's visual axis. And if it is high, normally they are very close to each other. If it is high, then the light ray in the multifocal lens, instead of passing through the center, will pass to the border of the bullseye. That will cause too much of refractive problems. And in an actual scenario, if you look at the microscope image, the Purkinje image from the cornea, which is the triangle here, and the Purkinje image from the lens, which is not a triangle. So in that case, you can see that these two images should be within the bullseye. Then you are sure that this patient will not have too much of aberration induced by lens. Chromatic aberration does play a role, and a normal crystalline lens has a chromatic aberration of 47, and we must try to put a lens 47 or more to decrease chromatic aberration. Well, studies have proven that chromatic aberration also deteriorates the retinal image quality. So to conclude, patient satisfaction is not just a good Snell's acuity. It is important to look for ocular surface preoperatively, and to decide on the IOL, look into the preoperation of the aberrations and choose appropriate IOL, look into the condition of the zonules, look into the angle alpha, and make sure that worsening aberrations following surgery. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for this extensive presentation on the aberrations. I think we may have our discussions at the
I
end.
managed to finish in time. Thank you.
Yeah, you may. Yes, sir. Very nice. So we can have our discussions at the end. I think all the panelists, I would request any questions they have, and all the viewers, any question they have, they can just put in the chat box. And at the end, for 11 minutes, we have left for we have time for discussion. We can have extensive discussion on this topic. As I said, next is Dr. Sean, who will be speaking about the cornea problems and the cornea endothelial conditions which we have missed before surgery eventually may have a lot of problems post surgery. And cornea is a very important component for the good visual acuity in the post-operative period. So over to you, Sean.
Good morning, friends, and thank you, Dr. Praveen. This is a very important topic pertaining to cataract surgery, and Dr. Praveen has covered the ocular surface very well. I'll be talking more about the cornea, and many times we have a very uneventful case, but however, post-operatively, we have a big surprise, and then we do have to wonder what went wrong. So we'll divide it into endothelial disorders, conditions with the stromal pathology, and surface irregularity. Endothelial disorders are the most important priority here, and we often fail to carefully look at the other eye to look for presence of gut data by doing a specular reflection, or by doing a retroillumination with a dilated examination. You can pick up early gut data, and even if you don't have a specular microscope, you can ensure that you take the adequate precautions during surgery. Having a specular microscope is an invaluable tool, and you definitely look at two things. One is the polymegatism, that's the variation in the cell size. Here you have the standard deviation divided by the average cell size. If it is more than 40, then it is a marker. Look for pleomorphism, that is a variability in the cell shape and the percentage of hexagonal cells. If it is less than 60%, then again, you have to be very careful, even in routine cases, while handling them intraoperatively. So you assess the central corneal thickness, assess the specular microscopy, assess the visual compromise in these patients with Fuchs endothelial dystrophies. How much of the cornea is actually contributing to the defective vision? Is the patient complaining of fluctuating vision with blurry vision in the morning? Intraoperative considerations, including the use of dispersive viscoelastics and soft shell technique, have been well elaborated. And counseling the patient on the possibility of a post-operative delayed recovery, or sometimes even an endothelial decompensation. A rough guideline is a CCT of more than 640. However, it's not a definite guideline for a triple procedure. Pseudoexfoliation and PXF endotheliopathy often goes under-recognized. We are very well aware of the complications we'll face during surgery. We have a CTR ready. We're looking at glaucoma, but we fail to look at the endothelium. And it is well reported even with PXF endotheliopathy that anything with the EC endothelial cell density less than 2000 has a higher chance of decompensation with or without glaucoma. So in these patients in a study, almost 20 to 25% of patients had a low endothelial count. And you have to be careful while handling these cases, not only due to the complexity of the cataract, but also because the endothelium is more likely to be weaker. In hard brown cataract, sometimes you got to really decide, and this is a common mistake we make during our beginning phases of phaco. If you have a long list, just rush through a hard brown cataract and press the foot pedal as hard as you can end up with a really bad cornea. And sometimes doing a good SICS and letting down your hard brown ego is more important. Even a good SICS will give a very good result. In late stages of postoperative corneal edema, there's an interesting article, and I think we have to keep this in mind for looking for any nuclear fragments in the anterior chamber. And there are case reports 3 months, 6 months, even 1 year after surgery, which are residual nuclear fragment left in the inferior angle, causing corneal edema inferiorly and endothelial decompensation. If it's a nuclear fragment, go in again, aspirate and remove the fragment rather than leaving it behind. And chronic inflammation is also causing cystoid macular edema. In stromal pathology, what we're looking at is, in some cases where you have an innocuous looking stromal opacity, look carefully at the previous history of trauma, where the presence of deep vessels, look for the corneal sensations. And in these cases, if you're suspecting herpetic or other viral keratitis, make sure that you have an adequate antiviral cover. Rather than to pay the price after surgery, make sure that you start with oral antibiotics at least a couple of days or a week prior to surgery. And if required, even cover with a topical antiviral agent throughout the post-operatively for at least 1 month. The third and most important thing, we look at surface irregularity, and sometimes even after a careful evaluation, we've taken up the case for surgery, but in post-operatively, we look at presence of irregularity on the surface. And if we have a corneal topographer, it's always an advantage. However, sometimes we may just do a keratometry, or we may get an IOL master, we may get good readings, but the surface is more irregular than you think. And this can occur with a limbal pterygium, which is encroaching into the optical axis. And this affects the wavefront of the eye as well. Even in cases with EBMD, if you look and carefully see on the surface presence of these map, dot, and fingerprint irregularities on the surface, you're more likely to have a very irregular surface on topography. And these cases should be dissuaded from going for multifocal IOLs. Or you can first go for a PTK or a surface ablation, regularize the surface, and then consider for the premium intraocular lens at a later stage. Keratoconus and subtle ectasias may be missed without a topography, and not in this case of having an advanced keratoconus, but a subtle form thrust keratoconus can be missed, and we have to be very sure of the patient's vision, best corrected vision not improving to 6.6, cylindrical correction, scissoring reflex on keratometry, and other red flags to look for early ectasias. Similarly, with pellucid marginal degeneration, generally you get a high amount of against the rule astigmatism, and these cases will go for a toric intraocular lens. But however, premium multifocals and other lenses could be avoided due to the irregular surface. On topography, you get a classical crab claw appearance, and these cases you have to be careful while handling postoperatively. Again, sometimes a very small nodule in the periphery, in this case, a Salzmann's nodular degeneration with a heaped up epithelium and a thickened basement membrane. These cases, we may get a good central keratometry and go ahead with the surgery. But post-operatively, if you really look at the corneal surface, it does induce a surface irregularity due to the flattening of the cornea in that region. There's steepening adjacent to it. And if you see the topography here, the entire surface looks very irregular. So in these cases, it's better to go for a monofocal intraocular lens and avoid going in for premium lenses where you're likely to have a problem. Respect the corneal endothelium and play safe during surgery. Thank you, Dr. Praveen.
Thank you, Sean. I think you have covered complete, you have opened the Pandora's box of cornea. Just one question, Sean, in cases of PMD or ectatic disorders, will you treat the cornea before cataract surgery, or will you go for a toric intraocular implantation?
So I think that in most cases that we see, the presenting age of the patient is having a cataract is beyond 45 to 50 years of age. And in most of these cases, the ectatic disorder is quite stable. So only regularizing the surface of the cornea, if you have to see if the irregular astigmatism, or if the majority of the astigmatism in the central cornea, the major axis can be determined, and it is correlating with the accepting cylinder of the patient, I would definitely go for a toric intraocular lens.
Any experience of using Intacs with cataract?
No. I have not had an opportunity to do that.
So we'll have discussions in the end. There will be endless discussions.
you.
So we'll, next topic will be by none other than my close friend, Dr. Nikhil Gandhi, who is from Akluz, and he has a roaring practice in Akluz. He's a cornea and an IOL consultant. He has his own hospital called an Anupam Eye Hospital and Laser Center. He has received Best Award at WOC 2016, and he has designed few surgical instruments which are being used world over. I welcome you, Nikhil, for your presentation, and over to you, Nikhil.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Praveen, for having me here. And I'll be talking, I'm Dr. Nikhil Gandhi, and my topic is going to be on neurobiometry. I do not have any financial interest. My practice is basically based in a town called Akluz, which is 160 kilometers from Pune. And I practice with my father, who is a general ophthalmologist, and my younger brother, who is a vitreoretinal surgeon. I'm into practice for my past almost 1 decade. So Praveen has given me this topic, and my patient has complained that I can see clearly with glasses, but you ensured me of spectacle-free vision. So why did my patient complain something like this? So to put in other words, you promised me, patient says, you promised me moon, but I got to see this. So where did we go wrong? So what has changed over a period of years? Like the patient's level of expectations have been increased. We need to match those expectations, and also to save ourselves from the medical legal issues. Because whenever you place a multifocal or a premium IOL and you promise too much, the patients, and if the patient has got some issues, some complaints like this, we might land up into medical legal issues. So why did my patient complain something like this? Was it because of the proper patient selection? Was there insufficient counseling of the patient, or due to over promising during the counseling? Was there any glitch in the biometric IOL power calculation, which is most common? Was there any intraoperative surgical complication that has occurred and we failed to manage it properly? Or there was a post-operative management glitch that we missed in the pre-operative period, just like Praveen has mentioned. So which cases do we land up into surprises? The most commonest is the post-refractive surgery patients, wherein we fail to take the previous history, and we are quite busy into our practice, and we leave it to our the optometrist to take the history and do the scanning, and tend to miss the post-refractive surgery patients, and wherein requires a special care in evaluating the IOL power calculation. And also in the extreme axial length patients, like too short or too long axial length patients. Coming to the topic biometry, there are two types. One is the contact, and another one is non-contact. So in contact is applanation and immersion, whereas in non-contact is the optical or light. So applanation A scan gives a false short axial length due to variable corneal compressions, and the corneal it might lead to corneal micro abrasions, and it is highly operator dependent source. So there are quite chances of getting a wrong IOL power. Immersion A scan is easier alignment with the shell, so there is no corneal contact and improved consistency with less operator dependent, but it does not give much of a value other than A scan. Third is the partial coherence interferometry, which is a non-contact laser device which can be used in phakic, pseudophakic, phakic IOLs in posterior staphyloma patients with silicon oil, which is not limited by wavelength. So what is a perfect biometry machine? So the machine which would give you a correct axial length, a total keratometry reading. So total keratometry reading means getting a keratometric reading from the anterior surface and the posterior surface of the cornea, which I'll be talking on later, which would give us, or we should be able to give derive angle kappa and angle alpha. This machine should also give the lens thickness, anterior chamber depth, white to white, and pupillometry. All these demands need to be satisfied by a single machine to achieve a satisfactory visual outcome and to make a surgeon's life easy. And all the parameters need to be fit into the latest formulas to come to a proper IOL power calculation. So the newer biometry machines do serve all the above needs. So I do not have any financial interest in any of these machines. So the latest one I'll be speaking is on the Zeiss ILMaster 700. So if you compare with 500, as ILMaster 500, it is 500 is a partial coherence interferometry, whereas Zeiss 700 is a source biometry, which takes into which does around 2000 scans per second at 0, 30, 60, 90, and 120 and 150 degrees angle, and which is quite fast. It gives all these parameters, measurements in one go. And how do we compare with the ultrasound? Is the ultrasound A scan measures the axial length from the anterior surface of the cornea till the gross anterior surface of the retina, whereas the ILMaster or the Swift source measures from the tear film to the retinal pigment epithelium. Why is it really important? Because foveal thickness is about 150 microns, which varies with plus or minus 20 from the age of 10 to 80 years, and the parafoveal area is between 0.10 millimeters to 0.16 millimeters thickness, which can manipulate, or which would give you false. If you do an A scan, this would lead to a false IL power by the end of the measurement. This has got these latest biometry machines have got something called good fixation, wherein you can see a foveal pit in the image, and when there is when the patient is very well focused. If the patient is not focusing very well, as you can see in the right side, there's no foveal pit is visible, and this is a poor fixation. So in the images, while doing the A scan itself, you can make out whether the patient was very well centered or not. Now, to give an example, in this patient, when we repeated the scan, as you can see in first and second scan, there is good fixation. You can see a very good foveal pit in both the slides, whereas even the axial length is almost the same in the same eye when you repeat it. Only 10 microns of difference in the axial length. So this led to a hardly of 0.02 diopters of difference in the keratometry, and you get a correct same IL power after calculations, after repetitions in this patient. But to come on to the second example, in the same patient, if the patient is not focusing very well, as you can see, you cannot make out any foveal pit, and this is called a poor fixation. And there is, as you can see, there is more than 0.5 diopters of difference in the keratometry, and this leads to 190 microns difference in the axial length, and there is almost 1 diopter difference in the calculated IL power. So these machines can give you can guide you whether you are focused very well at the center or not. Now, second thing, these machines they measure is something called, for keratometry, is 3-zone telesynchronous, which gives 18 points and which takes measurements at 1.5, 2.5, and 3.5 millimeters and the center of the cornea. Total keratometry is something, these machines they give is total keratometry is the new measurement combining telecentric keratometry and Swift source OCT technology for the assessment of anterior and posterior corneal curvature, which have been used for the Barrett's formula. And this total keratometry, this improves the result of toric IL power calculation by 14% in your patients for plus or minus 0.5 diopters of cylinder. So the total keratometry is derived from it takes the measurements from the anterior surface of the cornea with the with the help of Swift source OCT with the B scan. It takes the posterior 3D points of the posterior surface of the cornea, and combining these all, it derives to a total keratometry. So anterior chamber depth, it gives the anterior chamber depth evaluation for the effective lens position. It also gives the lens thickness and central cornea thickness. So it gives value of white to white and pupillometry, which is important for angle alpha and angle kappa. Because if the angle kappa is more than 0.5 or 0.6, we should not go ahead with the multifocal IL, which might lead to glare and halos in the post-operative period. So combining all these measurements, we can apply it into these formulas and derive a proper IL power calculation. As you can see on the screen, multiple formulas have been used for different size and shape, lengths of the axial lengths of the eye. And as you can see, Holiday 2 text can be used for almost all the normal to extreme axial length patients. And this is something Holiday 2 takes into account with axial length, keratometry, anterior chamber depth, white to white, and the total keratometry. So with these latest biometries, you can use the latest formulas, wherein the Barrett's-Uniacke formula can be used for the normalize, and this Barrett formula takes into consideration of the posterior cornea into consideration derived from the nomogram, which Dr. Barrett had developed himself. So take-home message is for standard and expected post-operative outcome, you should be using the latest. You should incorporate the latest biometry into your practice. Proper counseling would save you from over-promising. Manage any complications intraoperatively, and post-operative care is especially in special conditions is really required. So by using the modern equipments and the latest formula, would obtain a correct IL power, which would yield what you had promised for, and that would be what you had promised a moon, and the patient will be really happy in the post-operative period. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil, for this extensive presentation on biometry. I think you have rightly said, promise less and deliver more. That's the most important message we need to give to our audience. And second thing is you need to have your optical biometry definitely in your practice. You cannot go ahead with the ultrasonic biometry always. It's very important to, at this point of time, with this such a tough cutthroat competition, you need to have an optical biometry. So next we'll be going to the most important topic, I think, for the audience, and it's very, very important. And it is none other than by my dear friend again, Dr. Bhuvan, who is a very proficient and prominent national level vitreoretinal surgeon who did his post-graduation from MD Ames. He has numerous publications, humongous publications, and I think he's none other than Bhuvan could throw light on this thing, because we all are enter segment and we see less about poster segment. I think Bhuvan is the best person to guide us and to tell us what to see and what to do. Over to you, Bhuvan.
Hi, Praveen. How are you?
Yeah, fine, Bhuvan.
Yeah, I'm sorry I joined a bit late. So first, I'd like to thank Praveen a lot. I came to know him when I was in Switzerland, Bern, doing my ICO fellowship, and it was really great knowing Praveen. So he's a very dear friend. We speak quite less, but I think whenever we speak, it's really a good quality and always fun. So I would like to thank Praveen a lot for including me. I would like to thank AIOS also. So I think this topic is very important, because all of the topics which we discovered are more of anterior segment, mainly refractive and ocular surface, and they're very important. And I think as anterior segment surgeons, you will evaluate carefully, and you'll be careful, and you'll rarely encounter these problems. However, I think you must have also, I think everybody has seen these things, that you do a good cataract surgery, everything is fine, the cornea is fine, the ocular surface is fine, the lens power, everything is absolutely fine, but the patient is not happy with his vision. The vision either has not improved, or the quality of vision is not good, or there is some visual complaints like metamorphopsia is there. So probably what has happened is
slides are not moving. Are moving the slides, Bhuvan?
Pardon?
The slides are not moving.
Yeah, I'll move it. I'm just giving an introduction. So I think the most important thing is you have to see the posterior segment. Examination of the posterior segment is very important. So this is the topic. I did not experience any improvement in the vision. It was same as before. So decoding the posterior segment. Important in a evaluation, I think it has been taught in our basics, in our pardon.
Disturbance or
everybody mute. Can everybody mute other than Bhuvan, please? It would be better. Bhuvan, you have a lot of time. You can just speak on this topic in detail.
So the preoperative evaluation is extremely important in a cataract case. We have been taught in our undergraduation, post-graduation, that you have to do a macular function test, double rod test. I'll not go into so much details. I will discuss more of the practical aspects. Now we have got the imaging, ocular coherence tomography, and optic disc evaluation. And then the last thing, important thing of one or two systemic, and in fact, only one systemic condition, I think diabetes, which has to be taken under consideration. So these are the things which I would like to discuss. So now I think everybody has gone through this, or probably have seen a patient who has done a cataract
Can you
surgery
make it
somewhere
in
else.
slideshow?
Sorry, I'm sorry. So there is an uneventful phacoemulsification. Post-operatively, there is no vision gain. So what to do? So I think the most important thing was to do a preoperative 90D slit lamp biomicroscopy. And if you found anything doubtful, the best thing is to refer this to a retina specialist to evaluate it before undergoing a cataract surgery. So what thing an anterior segment can do, they can undergo an OCT macula. So I'll be showing few cases which presented to me because the patient did not gain a vision after cataract surgery in our hospital. So you can see these two things. The foveal contour is not normal. This is something which will appear absolutely normal on a fundus picture. This is like a partial thickness hole or a lamellar hole, or these are changes because of the vitromacular interface, or a stage 1 or a very stage 2, a small macular hole early. So the patient, if a cataract surgery has been done in such patients, it will not lead to an increase in vision. The fundus mostly grossly, if you see with the indirect, mostly appears normal. There may be slight distortion of the visual reflex. So you have to be very careful. So there is a lamellar hole, a full thickness macular hole, which can be missed. And these are the patients which I have seen have undergone a cataract surgery somewhere else, and they refer to me, and this was the underlying pathology. So I think examination of the macula with a 90D slit lamp is very, very important. So I'll be just showing few more images of what can be missed and what could be the reason that is not there for a gain of vision after cataract surgery. So this is another thing. There is a macular hole which has got a broad base, but superficially the opening is very small. So again, on fundus examination, if not done thoroughly, or if you have in doubt, not refer to a retina specialist, you can easily miss this. So this is another condition in which there are little changes in the outer ellipsoid zone, few degenerations of the outer retina, the RP layers, which can be clearly seen on a OCT. And again, the fundus examination in such people would not give you much information. It will appear quite normal. If you do a good slit lamp examination, probably you will find some blunting of the foveal reflex, or a small scar could be appreciated just at the fovea, and OCT will help to pick this up. So again, these were patients in which cataract surgery had been done sometime. These are probably images, I think 3 or 4 years back, cataract surgery was done. They didn't gain any vision. So the patient came to me, and then when I examined, so these were the things. So for this, I can do a surgery so that the vision can gain. But in such a condition, I can't do anything, and the vision will be hampered. This patient has to be explained preoperatively that the vision will not improve. So again, this is a macular picture. If you do an indirect, you'll not see much changes. If you do it closely, you can examine some altered reflex. There is loss of some tortuosity. So this is the most common thing, a macular disorder that presents to us in which the patient does not gain vision. You can say it is CME, but I think this is prior, because there is presence of an epiretinal membrane which is present over the retina, and there is presence of macular schisis, macular edema, and this had led to patient had undergone cataract surgery and did not gain any vision. So you have to be very careful while evaluating the macula. This ERMs are the most common conditions which are seen in which the patient do not gain any vision. So other conditions is another ERMs in which again the fundus photo will be very normal. These are very subtle ERMs. They're mostly idiopathic. They're age related. They're because of the changes of the vitromacular interface. There'll be very minimal edema, loss of the foveal contour. Again, on examination, fundus examination, you may not able to appreciate it. But if there is any altered reflex, any doubt, you should undergo a OCT, or better refer to a retina person. Discuss the prognosis prior to the patient rather than doing a cataract surgery and then later facing it. So this is another condition, vitromacular traction. Again, the fundus in most of these cases will have a very near normal experience. But the important thing is here that the patient may get a good vision of 6/6 or 6/9, but will always complain of metamorphopsia, even with ERMs and VMTs. So be very careful. If a patient complains more of distorted vision, metamorphopsia, rather than contributing it to the cataract, I think evaluation of the retina is very important, because these conditions, if missed preoperatively and a patient undergoes cataract surgery, he will be after your life. And if this comes out, then probably the patient may require another surgical intervention, and it'll be not good for both the surgeon as well as the patient. So again, this is another condition, I think, ARMD or chronic CSR. You can see these patients. These are again a very normal fundus examination will be there, but if you see, there is again changes in the outer ellipsoid Brooks membrane. And these are other changes which you can see in the outer RPE. which are present. So these can be seen in conditions of AMD, in patients of chronic CSR, in which there may be damage of CSR. This is a huge PED which is there, but again on fundus examination, the PED may be sometimes look very small or maybe parafoveal, but once you do a OCT, there is presence of a PED, there may be presence of occult CNVMs. So it is very important to do OCT. OCT angio is also available, and if in doubt, again, I'm just specifying, you should refer to a retina specialist. So this was a patient which had undergone cataract surgery. There was some thinning of the retina which was there, but when you can see there is a scar also there. But when I did a OCT angiography, there is a well-defined vascular network was there, and this is a type 2 choroidal neovascular membrane which is present, and there is atrophy of the retina also. Although the patient was explained that there is ARMD, but this is a condition which required anti-VEGF. So here this is for further management. So again, this is a magnified view of the fundus. You can just see there is a small hemorrhage here, some RP alterations, and if not done properly, this will be easily missed. So when I did OCT, and you can see there is presence of fluid, there is presence of this membrane on the OCT angiography. This is an intraretinal. This is an intraretinal lesion. This is a CNVM type 3, and it can lead to loss of vision. So we have to be very careful. So these are other conditions, heretomacular degenerations, which can be present. The fundus mostly looks normal. The disc is looking slightly pale. This is because probably of the fundus photograph. But when I do a fundus autofluorescence, you can see that there is atrophy of the RP cells. This is like, again, I'll not go into details of heretomacular degeneration, but whenever there is an altered foveal reflex, or you feel that the cataract is quite minimal and not explaining the visual loss, or the complaints of the patients are like diminution of vision in the night or in the day, and it's probably started it slightly in the 20th decade and maybe progressed, you have to be very careful. Look for heretomacular degenerations, conditions like heretomacular degenerations. So you can see the fundus picture again is quite normal. This is another patient, but when you do a OCT again on the outer retina, you can see these deposits and these alterations which are happening, which could be an early case of Stargardt's disease. So this can be missed, and the patient also in such cases may have early complicated cataract, even in retinitis pigmentosa, and if they undergo surgery, they'll not have any vision gain. So this thing is usually not missed, but I'm just bringing this into focus because this is one of the patient who had a near normal fundus, had undergone cataract surgery, but here there is enlargement of the foveal avascular zone. The patient had been said that there is an old BRVO, but nothing to worry. But see, enlargement of the foveal avascular zone means that the patient will not gain vision. There will be a macular ischemia, even if there is no macular edema on an OCT, but because of this enlargement of the foveal avascular zone, there will not be any gain of vision. So you have to be very careful in cases which have got a previous history of vascular occlusion. Do OCT angiography or a FFA. There is also NV also here, and there is ischemia is a lot, so the patient will not benefit, and you can't do much about such patients. Even anti-VEGF do not help if there is ischemia of the macula. So once the OCT is normal, what to do next? And still the patient has a normal vision. The next thing you should come into mind is the disc. So these are the few conditions I'm just showing. So you can see there is glaucomatous optic atrophy. This is a congenital disc anomaly in which you can see there is an optic disc pit along with macular schisis, optic atrophy, morning glory syndrome. So after evaluating the the macula, if everything is normal, the next thing should come into mind is the optic disc is probably the reason for the loss of the vision. So you have to be very careful. So these are other conditions in which you can see disc edema. So this was one patient who had undergone cataract surgery in the left eye and was not happy. The vision did not improve beyond 6/12. So when a detailed examination was done, the patient was found to have such severe papilledema in both the eyes, and the blood pressure was normal. But however, when an MRI was done, there was found to be a space occupying lesion. So you have to be very careful examination of the disc. This is another patient.
Doctor, sorry to interrupt. We need to come down to the concluding slide, please. I'm so sorry about it.
Okay, but actually I started also late. So, okay, so I'll conclude still. So this is a case of AION. This is again a case of disc edema. So this is another fundus picture in which we can see there is presence of a capillary hemangioma is there. A fundus looks quite normal. There is some altered reflex. So this can also cause problems later in the future. So if there's a loss of vision after 10 to 14 days, the other causes could be CME, retinal detachment, endophthalmitis. I'll not go into details of this. We're also running short of time. One important thing which I have to tell is high myopia is a very important condition. You have to do a good peripheral examination. It can lead to retinal detachment later. The study of the central macula is also very important. There is maybe presence of myopic CNVs, myopic schises. So this is the patient that had undergone again cataract surgery in the left eye. When you do a OCT, you can see there is presence of this macular schisis. So I think in high myopes patients, it is always better to do a OCT beforehand and look for the presence of macular schisis. So I'll conclude in a minute. So this is attractional myopic maculopathy. The other important systemic condition, which I said, is diabetes. It is very important because it can lead to progression of DME as well as the severity of the diabetic retinopathy after cataract surgery. So preoperative assessment is very important and frequent follow-ups is also very important. This is the case, I think we all have seen that sometimes there is severe progression of the PDR. It can also lead to NV and NVG. I think one time in your career, you will see a patient that has undergone cataract surgery and developed NVG. So this was a patient with a near normal fundus, trust me, and this is the picture that he had after about 2 to 3 months because he did not evaluate his fundus, and a severe NPDR had progressed to NVG in this patient. And once it reaches that stage, despite all efforts, it's very difficult to save these eyes. So appropriate and timely intervention in diabetic patients is very important. You require frequent follow-ups. So my take-home message is posterior segment evaluation, especially macular morphologies and functions, is extremely essential in a cataract workup. OCT is the gold standard for macular pathologies. If in any doubt, preoperatively only refer that patient to a retina specialist. A special attention should be given to the macula and the posterior segment in high myopia cases, especially pathological myopia. Patients with diabetic retinopathy need a detailed evaluation. Post-operatively also, I think frequent post-op visits to monitor the macular edema and the progression of diabetic retinopathy. So the most important rule, as we are taught during our post-graduation, is always look whether the cataract commensurates with the visual acuity. If in doubt, always refer the patient to a retina specialist. So thank you very much. Thank you, Praveen. And I'm sorry if I overtook my time, but I think I started also slightly late.
So thank you, Bhuvan, for I think you have covered the whole spectrum of retinal diseases where we need to see the before cataract surgery. It's very, very important because we are here. The purpose of this IC is to promise less and deliver more. And the next speaker is none other than by our own Dr. Soham Basak, who is one of the most prolific cornea surgeon, and he is my junior in Aravind, and he's the son of the most famous ophthalmologist in the country, Dr. Sama Basak. Soham is also a very good surgeon. I have seen his growth over the years, and it's very, very good to see that within such a less age, he has grown to such big heights. Soham has did his MS and FRCS. He's the cornea consultant at Disha Eye Hospital. Has numerous publications in peer-reviewed journals. He's our keynote speaker of this IC, and he will be speaking on the complete range of vision, like the bifocals and the trifocals, and good case selection. Over to you, Soham.
Thank you so much, Dr. Praveen, for inviting me to this IC and for the very kind introduction. So I'll be talking mostly about the good case selection part of the bifocal and trifocal aspect of it. So I'll be mentioning some of the proprietary products, but I have no financial interest in this talk. So a bit of disclaimer before. So beyond the scope of this talk is I will not be going into the details of the detailed physics and optics behind the various multifocal IOLs that we have. Then I think biometry has been covered quite in depth. Then also I'll not be talking about MFIOL in pediatric and post laser vision because those are very complex topics again. I'll not be doing a brand to brand comparison, and also I'll not be talking about how to manage the unsatisfied patient because that I think deserves a talk of its own. So the human eye, as we know, is the perfect optical system. We get both of the best of the focus and the contrast. So there is no IOL currently in the market which is able to replicate what we are seeing with our non-natural human eye optics. So multifocal IOLs over the years, they come close. They offer some multifocality, but at the cost of some contrast loss. So here, patient selection is probably the most important aspect if you want to build your multifocal success story. So again, personal disclaimer, I have very small experience with operating on my multifocal IOLs. However, I have been doing a workup for most of the patients in the Shai hospitals. So, and I also spent time mostly with our senior cataract colleagues. So this will be a combination talks about what I have learned personally and what I have discussed with our cataract senior colleagues at the Shai hospitals. So multifocal IOLs are actually quite older than what we would think it is. It's been around almost 30 plus years now, starting with the New View, which was a refractive, and then the 3M IOL, the first diffractive lens in the market. So we have the refractive, which is now sort of out of vogue. The modern lenses are more of the diffractive pattern, which is based on the Huygens principle. So you have this microscopic steps of concentric rings. And then there's the newer extended depth by the Johnson & Johnson. And also the hybrid lenses, which combine the physics of both a diffractive and a refractive to sort of give the best of the vision possible. So this is a very nice chart from one of the review articles. If you look at it, so you have the older refractive lenses, the newer diffractive, and also some of these hybrid lenses. And we have moved from the bifocality to now the trifocals and also the quadrifocal lenses in the current era. And then there is also some extended depth of focus, symphonic being the most common one. And if you look at this graph, it basically shows how each lens performs at distance, intermediate, and near. And these are the IOLs. So you can sort of get an idea of which lens will perform better for the distance, and some lenses are geared better for a near vision. So this will help you in better choosing the IOL once you talk to the patient and see what sort of activities they do. This again is a big chart from Geetangsha and Mahipal sir's article. So it basically shows you all the different physical properties of the various multifocal lenses that we have in the market. What I want to draw your attention is, because the newer lenses, you have these combined refractive and diffractive combination lenses, which are currently the market norm. Now, choosing between a refractive and a diffractive. So the refractive lenses, they give you better contrast. However, they are more pupil dependent, the more centration dependent, and they offer you more of a good distance vision. Diffractive lenses, on the other hand, they are less pupil dependent. They have less glare and halos. However, there is a loss of contrast. So you'll have to choose sort of what you want to offer to the patient before picking an IOL for them. And coming to the patient factors, so we can have them divided as ocular factors, personal factors, and also the cataract factors. So ocular factors, most of our great speakers before me, they have discussed most of it before. So biometry is very important. Optical biometry must be done. If you have an access, do it with two of the newer generation formulas. Maybe pick a Barrett Universal 2, the Huygens, or maybe the Hill RBF. Preferably, definitely an optical biometry. Astigmatism, again, very important. If it is more than 1.25, better to go for a toric platform rather than relying on your incisions or an LRI, because that's more predictable. Look at the pupil and iris center, and this angle kappa also comes along with it, because any decentration here, again, the physics will just not work out and the patient will be very unhappy. Healthy surface, my dear friend Dr. Praveen has covered this already. Prior laser vision surgery and multifocal, now this is a extremely very complex situation, and you'll have to talk to the patient a lot before attempting to do this. Comorbidities, Dr. Bhuvan has already covered all the details, the retinal pathologies that we can anticipate. And again, at Disha, we do a mandatory macular OCT to all the cataracts patient preoperatively. Squint again, ask them specifically about any squint surgeries beforehand, because even if they're orthophoric now, the binocularity might not work out. So once they get 2 eyes, multifocal IOL, if they're not getting a good binocular single vision, the whole physics again does not work out. Wide angle kappa, and also the existing refraction. So whether they are a hyperope or a myope to begin with. Personal factors, look at their occupation, primarily what they're doing. if they're doing a lot of driving and outdoor activities, night driving, and also look at their personality, if they're like sort of a cheerful person or if they're a very critical person. So this is also probably one of the most important outcome determining factors. So a little bit about the pupil center. So this is the IOL master chart, and this is from the LensStar. So you do have all these details in the main chart. If you look at this shows you the iris decentration, and in the LensStar you have these two things, the iris barycenter and the pupil barycenter. These are the things to look at. So any abnormal values here, better not to go for a multifocal IOL implantation. Coming to the cataract factors, so any complex cataracts or any complex anterior chamber anatomy, better to avoid as beginners. Of course, cataract masters can do anything. So mature and suprahard, so you do not know if you'll be able to complete the rhexis or if the PC will be intact. Uveitic eye, again similar. If there's a subsequent episode of uveitis, there will be inflammatory deposits on the lens, just destroying the physics. Small pupil, posterior polar cataract, anterior lens capsular fibrosis, or zonular weakness. These again will not ensure an intact rhexis or an intact centration of the IOL in the long term. So better to avoid. Now choosing the IOL. So this I would suggest go for a platform that you are go from the natural progression from the monofocal to the multifocal platform, because you know the IOL anatomy very well. So you can choose between the bi, tri, quadra, or extended depth of focus. Chromophores, I'm not a big fan of them. I would rather prefer a white lens. Target refraction, so you can have a mix and match. Plate versus round haptics. Foreign lenses always preferred. And you can always better for a toric correction. Counseling, where most important, tell them, give them a heads up about the loss of contrast, tell them that there might be halos and glare, but we cannot predict who will get it. Neuroadaptation is very important. Some spectacle dependence will be there for a few activities. In extreme cases, they might need to do an IOL exchange or an IOL explant altogether. Give them realistic expectations. This is a very nice chart from the ASCRS committee on how to go about multifocal IOLs. And this is more of a personality test more than anything else. So just talk to the patient. And if they are with you and if they're willing to go for any repeat procedures, those are the ideal candidates for a multifocal IOL. Workup, I have already covered most of them. Aberrometry and topography is very important here. And also these are just some additional tools and toys that you can have in your OT. Femtosecond makes it more, all of them, they are just to improve the predictability of your IOL calculation. So in the OT, better to have some backup IOLs. Just one more slide after this. IOL loading is also very important. So finally, to conclude, so before you advise and go ahead in the OT, understand the patient personality, their activity and their needs. Good workup with all the investigations, realistic counseling, most important. Biometry and IOL selection, this will be guided by your investigation tools. Explain to them that this requires more testing than a routine cataract surgery. So once you have your ideal case selected, go ahead and enjoy your multifocal IOL. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think you have covered everything about multifocal, what we need to know for a good case selection. Whoever wants to start doing multifocal IOLs, you need to know, go through these things. And this presentation will be a standard presentation for all the patients, for all the persons who wants to start multifocal IOLs. I think we'll go to the next topic because we have less time. That then we can have a little bit of discussion. The next topic is by my senior and my friend, Dr. Debashish Chakrabarti. He is a fellow of the LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad, and he's a consultant in at Center for Sight, Calcutta. He has conducted various instruction courses, and he is a very proficient glaucoma surgeon of Calcutta. I think this topic can be covered by none other than Dr. Debashish. Over to you, Debashish, to give us about the pulse about glaucoma management before cataract surgery.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Praveen, for including me in this IC. So I'll share my screen. Okay. So technology behaves cataract surgery. We have had wonderful talks so far regarding how to use the latest technology to promise best vision for our cataract patients. So this is a real patient I have seen in the last few months. So this was actually a 58-year-old physician who had undergone uneventful phaco with PCIOL. And ever since after surgery, he had been complaining of a foggy vision. The patient has consulted several ophthalmologists, and when he came to me, I reviewed the past records, and I found that the preoperative records show a vision of 6/18 N12 and an NS3 cataract disc. It was written as 0.4:1, and NCT was 18, and fundus within normal limit. So it was a perfect phaco, lens in the bag, everything was perfect, but still he has foggy vision. So we dilated the patient, and we found that his discs were suspicious. It was around 0.6, 0.7 cupping, and there was some doubtful RNFL defect. And we did the OCT and the perimetry for this patient. As you can see in this OCT, in this RNFL deviation map, there is RNFL thinning in both the eyes. He had not gone cataract surgery in one eye, but both the eyes, you can see this RNFL defect, and it is correlating with this RNFL thinning in the circular tomogram. And there is a incomplete superior arcuate scotoma in both eyes. So we had missed glaucoma in this patient, and therefore the patient is unhappy. Now the patient wants to know from you why the glaucoma has not been detected or discussed earlier, why no tests for glaucoma were done, why the girded visual prognosis was not discussed. So for that, he will seek opinion of several ophthalmologists, and somebody will tell it's a nice surgery, but glaucoma has been missed. Somebody will tell something else, and all this will have medical legal implications. So why was glaucoma missed in this patient? So retrospectively, this can happen to anybody if we do not pay proper attention to the disc before cataract surgery. So why we do not pay proper attention? One is, we can assume, well, this patient has cataract, I'm not getting a perfect view, so let me focus on the cataract surgery first. We'll look at the disc later. Secondly, it can be a very busy OPD, and there's not enough time for disc evaluation. So when the patient has cataract, post him for cataract surgery, everything will be taken care of afterwards. Then the HVF was not requested for this patient. Remember, the patient has 6/18 vision. He would have done quite a fair HVF because the HVF was not requested because the glaucoma was not suspected. And you might think that the vision is poor. Let us delay HVF for the time being. For the same reason, OCT was not requested because the glaucoma was not suspected. And you probably thought that the image quality would be poor. So we must employ all the tools of the trade to detect any abnormality. Whatever has been discussed so far, the first thing is that there should be a suspicion in our mind. Only then we can request some investigations. So comprehensive eye examination with a high index of suspicion, that is the basic thing that is needed. So regarding glaucoma, we should look at the peripheral antechamber depth, do a gonioscopy if needed, appellation tonometry. Careful disc evaluation is the most important thing. Most of the glaucomas you will suspect from the careful disc evaluation. And if needed, you take care of the investigations like automated perimetry, pachymetry, OCT RNFL, and in some cases, anterior segment OCT. For example, in this patient, you can see that the peripheral antechamber depth is very narrow compared to this, which is a normal antechamber depth. So if you do gonioscopy, you will see a picture like this, and on indentation, you will see like this. So do not be fooled by this pigmentation. This is not the posterior trabecular meshwork. This is actually pigmentation anterior to the Schwalbe line because it's a case of primary angle closure. And this is the picture of in the gonioscopy. You see after indentation, you can see the angle has now opened up. This is the actual posterior trabecular meshwork. So these are cases of angle closure. And when you have YAG PI with very narrow angles, particularly if the AC is shallow and the cataract is dense and the patient has borderline IOP, my practice is always to do a YAG PI before the phaco. Why? Because it will avoid a pupillary block during dilatation. You never know, the patient can suffer from an acute attack of angle closure glaucoma. Then when you have an increased AC depth, you have easy maneuver during phaco, and there is a less chance of endothelial decompensation. And most importantly, patient realizes that there is a suspicion of glaucoma, something needs to be done about that. So he's mentally prepared that he will require treatment for that afterwards. Also, you can take help of this anterior segment OCT in select cases. It has been seen that in about 1/3 of the cases of primary angle closure disease, even after YAG PI, the angles do not open up. This is because the basic pathology is in the lens. So this new parameter has come up, which is called the lens vault. So if you draw a horizontal line across the two scleral spurs, and you take this perpendicular distance from the back of the cornea to this horizontal line. So this distance from the anterior lens surface to this horizontal line is called the lens vault. If this lens vault is more than 1/3 of this total distance, then this is called a high lens vault. And these patients will definitely, their glaucoma will also improve after a cataract surgery. So now we come to the correlation of the various investigations. For example, if the patient has come to you for cataract surgery and you look at the disc, so apparently you may miss glaucoma in this patient because this patient has around 0.6 cupping. This can be a normal also if it's particularly if it's a large side disc. But if you look carefully, you will see that there is an RNFL defect here. And then if you do the OCT, you will find that there is a correlating change here in the macular OCT also. And the perimetry shows this few changes. So you should not miss glaucoma in such patients and correlate all the findings. So as you know, you look for the 5 R's in the disc evaluation: the scleral ring, the neuroretinal rim, the retinal nerve fiber layer, the region of the peripapillary atrophy, retinal and the optic disc hemorrhages. And in the glaucomas, you know what are the important features of the glaucomatous field defects, like a pattern deviation plot. This is a criteria developed by Anderson and Patella. Pattern deviation plot with greater than equal to 3 non-edge points with p-value less than 5%, 1 point with p-value less than 1% cluster in the arcuate area, and this is the known criteria. So you look carefully whether the defect in the perimetry is correlated with the glaucomatous field defect. Remember, even if the cataract is moderately dense, the patient can perform fairly well with a automated perimetry. Moreover, you will have some documentation which will avoid some medical legal problem in future. Then coming to the most important thing, OCT. This is because we are discussing about the technology-driven cataract surgery. So like the OCT, macula is helpful. The OCT RNFL is very helpful to detect various cases of glaucoma. And this is a basic anatomy of the OCT. I will not discuss the details, but just the broad features. Like in case of a normal healthy RNFL, there will be red and yellow color in the superior and the inferior poles. In an abnormal OCT, there will be thinning here. And in this subtraction map, or you can see that there is red and yellow color here, which means that RNFL is thin here. And this is correlating with a circular tomogram here. So a normal response to an OCT is just to look at the circular tomogram, but you should look at the OCT as a whole. But always remember that there's a normative database with which the OCT has some comparison. So if it is in the green level, between the 5% to 95%. If it is in the red level, it is the borderline. If it is abnormal, it's the yellow level, it's borderline. So these are the things that you should look for in the OCT, and most importantly, you should correlate. Like an inferior RNFL defect should correlate with a superior field defect. So I would not discuss the details, like you can have a red disease in case of high myopia. There can be red, but the patient may be normal. And you can also have green disease, but the OCT may appear normal, but you should not miss this disc hemorrhage here and the few points in the perimetry. So preperimetric glaucoma are entities. And lastly, I would discuss a small point about the various other causes which can give rise to field defects, like the neurological field defects. Like this patient presented with this disc pallor, but you found that there is a optic nerve glioma. This patient had a meningioma, and this is a field defect obeying the vertical midline, and this was due to a pituitary tumor. So all in all, we should stress on the comprehensive eye examination before advising cataract surgery. There should be liberal use of glaucoma diagnostics whenever feasible, and this will protect us from the embarrassment of medical legal complications, and this can prevent irreversible blindness for the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Devashish sir. Do we have time for a discussion? How many minutes for the next session, please?
Yes, sir, you have time for discussion.
Also,
we have to end this session by 9:20.
9:20.
Yeah,
so
9:25 we can give you, 9:25.
We have 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So individual questions to Ashok sir. Sir, what is the single most important aberration you need to see in a premium IOL surgery? So the question is for you, sir. Any single aberration like the coma or defocus? What are the things you see when you do a premium surgery?
There are two things I'd like to first see. The first is okay, and obviously if I have access to aberrometry, then yes, I'll look into the corneal aberration and spherical aberration. Spherical aberration you have to see in a premium IOL, because if you are actually dealing with a patient who are negative spherical, you are again giving another negative spherical aberration with the lens, then it is worsening the thing.
Okay, okay.
So you have corneal angle alpha.
Okay, okay, sir. So the
Dr.
next
Praveen?
yeah, yes, please.
Yeah, I had a question on multifocals and myopes because very often they feel that their near vision is really lost after surgery. So if the OCT is good, then what additional things can we choose for, like a +4 ad or any other inputs from the other speakers?
In the yes,
So,
Dr. Soham.
so from what experience what we have at Disha, for lower myopes, better to avoid a multifocal because they are so used to having that near vision without glasses, and that sharpness cannot be given by multifocals. But
So
for high myopes,
you would undercorrect the monofocal by how many diopters?
I would go for maybe for low myopes 0.75 to 1, but for high myopes maybe 1.25 to 1.5.
You would assume 1.5 diopters.
Yes,
myopia.
yes.
But Sean,
And
I
for a
have done,
multifocal?
so Sean, I have done multifocal for myopic patients. Both eyes I've targeted for emmetropia, and it worked well. It worked
Okay.
well.
So you had a +4 ad in those cases.
Yeah, yeah. One is 2.5,
High ad.
one is 4. I went for that. It
Okay.
was before, I think, Restore, the
Okay.
time of Restore lenses. So for Sean, for you, the question is for the endothelial count, which you have already discussed. What is the viscoelastic you will prefer in these cases? In cases of a poor endothelium and all those things, what is the viscoelastic which you will prefer in cataract surgery?
I think we do have access to using Viscoat to coat the endothelium. And I was mentioning about the soft shell technique, which was proposed by Arshinov, where you initially inject the dispersive viscoelastic, and then you, in the center, you inject the high molecular weight elastic so that it pushes the dispersive and coats the endothelium well during surgery. But more importantly is be conscious of using less phaco power in these cases.
Yes.
And repeatedly injecting viscoelastic during your surgery as well. Even in Fuchs, I generally advise the patient to undergo early cataract surgery so the cataract is not too hard when you're dealing with it.
So question to Nikhil, in IOLMaster 500 and 700, and what was the difference? Will you prefer a IOLMaster 700 or a Lenstar?
I would definitely prefer a IOLMaster 700 because it has, this machine has been incorporated with all the Barrett's and Haggis formulas, and you don't really have to pay extra for getting these formulas as well. Because just having the parameters wouldn't get you the calculate IL power, but then if you have the measurements as well as the formula incorporated into your machine,
yeah, it will be present. So Bhuvan,
Lenstar also has Barrett's formula incorporated into that, and it's free of cost. But then the other advantage of IOLMaster 700 is the mechanism of its principle of its biometry. It's not a luminous partial coherence thing, but it is based on swept source.
Yeah, it's a script source, so it is quite fast and it gives the actual real-time this thing. It takes
its penetration is much better also. Almost up to about hand movement vision you can have.
So Bhuvan, I have one question for you. In cases of diabetic macular edema with cataract surgery, what are the number of injections you need to give before cataract surgery? Is it 1 or 2? Or it needs to be individualistic? Unmute Bhuvan.
It has to be individualized, Praveen, actually.
Yeah.
Because I think diabetic macular edema, you have to assess how much the edema is. So it has to be different for every patient.
Yeah.
If probably there is a severe diabetic macular edema, I think it is very important for us to control and reduce the macular edema with the 2 or probably 3 injections and then undergo a cataract surgery. Because even after cataract surgery, the macular edema may increase.
That's a very important. Yeah, because macular edema worsens after cataract surgery, which we have seen a lot of cases not improving.
And if there is a subclinical macular edema, probably what you can do is you can give one injection, do the cataract surgery, and then continue with the treatment further and do a good monitoring.
I think that's a very well point taken.
And the other thing which you have to just look, you have to also look at the status of the severity of the diabetic retinopathy, whether it is NPDR or PDR. So that also has to be taken care of.
Soham, I think you have covered almost all the things about the good case selection. And I think for you, a personal question, if you want to get operated for cataract surgery, will you go for multifocal or will you go for monofocal?
So right now, given the activities that I do, I would go for a monofocal lens.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think everybody and ophthalmologist will go for a monofocal only.
Praveen,
No,
I
no,
think
no,
by the time
I
Paul
beg to
reaches that
differ.
age, we'll go for light
Yeah.
adjustable lenses.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
probably at my stage go for a trifocal lens. Absolutely. I don't think there is a reason. Yeah, for younger people, probably yes.
Yes.
But for my age, I think I'd be fine with a trifocal.
So you are also very young, very active.
And last question to Dr. Devashish sir. Devashish sir, will you go for a TRAB or a primary cataract surgery in angle closure glaucomas?
No, that would depend on the extent of the cataract and the severity of glaucoma. So if it's a case of angle closure glaucoma with some amount of cataract, then depending on the other parameters and all, phaco is definitely going to help these patients. And in most of the cases, you can go with a simple cataract surgery. So you can do a YAG PI first, and you can go ahead with a cataract surgery. So unless the gonioscopy shows extensive peripheral anterior synechiae and the pressure is very high and is not liable to be controlled with a phaco alone, you can go with a clear corneal phaco in most cases.
So at the end, we will be handing over to the next session. So thank you very much, speakers, for enlightening us about the cataract surgery and technology BS cataract surgery. The very successful program. We hope we'll continue in the next.
Thanks a lot, Dr.
Thank you,
Praveen.
Praveen sir.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
wait for the next
And,
AIOC.
Yeah.
I would like to
Awesome.
grab the opportunity to thank Dr. Praveen. And also I would like to thank all the speakers who are here for sharing your screen time and giving all your presentations, valuable ones. Thank you so much. Thank you to have you here on the
Thank you.
virtual platform.